being in an open field, under the scorching desert sun. On the horizon, a distant rumble begins to be heard, like thunder. The earth is shaking. It's not elephants or cars. They are Parthian Cataphracts, fully armored warriors mounted on horses, also armored. Authentic human tanks from ancient times. The Cataphracts arose in the ancient Parthian Empire, in the region that today corresponds to Iran and surrounding areas. They were a direct response to Western powers like Rome and Greece, but also to nomadic enemies from the east. Its purpose was simple: to break enemy formations with a brutal charge, like a battering ram of flesh, bone, and metal. But what made them so feared was not just their power, but their imposing appearance. From head to toe, and from the horse's snout to its tail, everything was covered in armor of metallic scales, often sewn onto thick leather. Parthian warriors wore conical helmets, chain mail, arm and leg protection. And they carried long spears called contus, which were wielded with both hands, as if they were medieval spears. But centuries before, some ancient chroniclers described them as men made of iron. Their mere presence was a psychological threat. They reflected the sun, advanced in close formation, and seemed invulnerable. For many enemies, facing them was like fighting against a moving wall. But behind that image of invincibility there was much more: tactics, training, and a very specific role within the Parthian army. Because the Cataphracts were not simple heavy cavalry. They were the spearhead of a devastating military system. And to understand what made them so lethal, you have to look closely at their equipment and how they used it on the battlefield. We'll see that in the next part. Infantry were the muscle of an army. The Cataphracts were the final blow. His power lay not only in his intimidating presence, but in the precise design of his equipment and his attacking technique. First, the horse. Unlike most ancient cavalry, where the rider could be well protected but the horse was exposed, in the case of the Cataphracts the horse was also armored. Covered with metal scales, plates or mail, it became an extension of the rider, like a single armored and devastating body. Then, the star weapon, the contus spear. It was no ordinary spear. It measured up to 4 meters in length, and was held with both hands. This meant that the Cataphracts did not use a shield, they relied entirely on their armor and on the enemy not surviving the charge. The impact of a contus, launched at full speed, could pierce shields, armor, and the man behind them. Some also carried swords or axes as secondary weapons, for close combat after the initial clash. But the idea wasn't to stay and fight, it was to attack with such violence that the enemy would collapse before reacting. And how did they use all this? The catastrophes didn't carry themselves. Their true potential appeared when they coordinated with horse archers, another key unit of the Parthian army. While the archers harassed from a distance, forcing the enemy to break formation or move, the Cataphracts waited. And when the enemy was disorganized, unprotected, they came in at full speed, like an iron hammer. This combination of speed, psychological pressure, and crushing force made them one of the most devastating units of ancient times. And if there's one battle that shows what the catastrophes could do, it was the one that humiliated the Roman Empire like few times in its history. Year 53 BC, the Roman general Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the richest and most powerful men in Rome, decides to invade Parthia. He expected an easy victory. Quick. Profitable. What he got was a historic humiliation. Crassus marched with over 35,000 soldiers into Parthian territory. His goal was glory and plunder. But something awaited him that Rome neither understood nor was prepared to face. An elite force composed of 2 types of perfectly coordinated troops. Horse archers, swift and deadly. Cataphracts, slow but unstoppable. The meeting took place on the plains of Carrhae, in what is now Turkey. Crassus formed his troops in the classic Roman square to withstand attacks from all sides. But that training was his condemnation. The Parthian archers began to fire arrows without rest, riding in circles around the Roman army, out of range of their missiles. Arrow after arrow, rain after rain. The Romans couldn't advance. They couldn't escape. They could only resist. And when they were already exhausted, thirsty and disorganized, the Cataphracts entered. The charge was brutal. The rigid Roman formation could neither maneuver nor absorb the impact. The long Parthian spears pierced shields and armor like paper. It was a massacre. Crassus tried to negotiate and ended up dead. His son was also killed. The Romans lost thousands of men. It was such a humiliating defeat that Rome avoided attacking Parthia for decades. And all this thanks to a perfect tactical combination. Psychological pressure, wear and tear from a distance, and devastating shock. The Parthian catastrophes not only won the battle, they earned their legend. But were they really invincible? Not entirely. At first glance, the catastrophes seemed unstoppable, armored to the teeth, mounted on armored horses, with lances capable of piercing entire formations. But like everything in war, they also had weak points. Unfavorable terrain equals catastrophe. Cataphracts needed open spaces to load. His strength lay in speed and impact. But if the terrain was rocky, mountainous, muddy, or full of obstacles, the charge became less effective or could not even be carried out. In these cases, they were exposed, slow and clumsy against more agile troops. Limited maneuverability with so much armor, neither rider nor horse could move freely in prolonged close combat. If the enemy survived the initial charge, they could surround, attack from the flanks, or knock out the catastrophe with more flexible tactics. Fatigue and heat covered in metal under the desert sun, both men and horses quickly overheated. In long battles, physical wear and tear accumulated. Furthermore, if the charge failed, catching one's breath and reorganizing was difficult. Their armor protected them, but it also wore them down. Dependence on tactical support, as we saw at Carrhae, their success depended in part on horse archers. Without them, the catastrophes could not wear down or pin down the enemy before attacking. Charging against well-positioned and fresh formations could be suicidal. In short, they were tanks, yes. But like real tanks, they needed ideal conditions to shine. In the right scenario, they were unstoppable. In the wrong one, they were an easy target. Even so, his concept was so revolutionary that it did not disappear with the births. In fact, it inspired many empires after it. Parthian Cataphracts may have been pioneers, but their story did not end with the fall of Parthia. Its impact was so great that its concept was recycled, evolved, and survived for centuries. The Sassanids take up the torch. When the Parthian Empire fell and the Sassanid Empire emerged, 3rd to 7th centuries AD, the new Persians adopted and perfected the formula. Their Cataphracts were even more sophisticated, heavier armor, better organization, and more refined tactics. The Romans and Byzantines faced them and learned. The Roman Empire was not far behind. After suffering defeats like Carrhae, the Romans began to copy what they could not destroy. In the late Empire, they adopted similar units called Clibanarii or Clibanarii, directly inspired by the Cataphracts. They were equally armored, with armored horses, long lances, and shock function. Even Byzantium, heir to Rome, maintained this type of heavy cavalry for centuries. In wars against Persians, Arabs, and peoples of Central Asia, they continued to use tactics based on the original Parthian model. Echo in the Middle Ages. And it doesn't end there. Many historians see the Cataphracts as the direct antecedent of medieval European heavy cavalry. The principle is the same: elite warriors, mounted, armored, with a spear as the initial blow. The difference is that the Cataphracts did it centuries earlier, and in a world where combat was much more diverse.